Innovator, entrepreneur, game changer. In his short life, Steve Jobs co-founded Apple and became the CEO of Pixar. He championed clean, user-friendly design and introduced consumers to sleek, innovative technology. Jobs permanently changed the way we listen to music and connect with the outside world. He racked up countless awards and accolades, including Businessman of the Year and Entrepreneur of the Decade. But before any of that success, before the Apple II and iPods and iPhones, Steve Jobs was a disheveled college dropout in desperate need of a job. So in early 1974, Steve Jobs went to what seemed like the coolest, most laid-back tech company in Silicon Valley, the recently formed video game company, Atari. When he showed up at Atari headquarters, Jobs didn't have much going for him. He'd recently dropped out of Reed College in Portland, Oregon, where he struggled with the most basic realities of being a college student. He resisted rules and structure. He complained to longtime friend and eventual Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak, saying, "They're making me take all these courses." Wozniak was unsympathetic. He replied, "Yes, that's what they do in college." But Wozniak's quip didn't give Jobs any perspective. Jobs dropped out and eventually moved back home to California, where his presence at Atari caught the eyes and noses of the small staff. He was smelly, disheveled, and oddly dressed. Some said he looked like a 20-year-old Ho Chi Minh. His unusual appearance was outmatched only by his arrogance. Atari's chief engineer Al Alcorn said, "I was told we've got a hippie kid in the lobby. He says he's not going to leave until we hire him. Should we call the cops or let him in?" I said, "Bring him in." Atari was just 2 years old at the time, but it already had a major win under its belt. In 1972, Alcorn created Pong, a simple table tennis game that was designed merely as a training exercise. But Atari co-founders Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney saw potential in the simplistic, addictive arcade game. Soon, Pong was a runaway hit. Atari needed to meet demands while at the same time create the next best thing in video games. Initially, Steve Jobs didn't seem like the answer to their prayers. He had very few skills. Although bright, he had very little education. But one of Alcorn's engineers, Don Lang, had been asking for a technician to help him out. So Alcorn took a gamble. He hired Steve Jobs to fill the role, making him Atari's 40th employee. But Jobs and Lang butted heads almost immediately. Alcorn said, "The next day, Don came to me and said, 'What did I do to deserve this?' I said, 'What? You wanted a tech, you got a tech.' He said, 'This guy's filthy. He's just obnoxious, and he doesn't know electronics.'" Lang had a point. Jobs firmly believed that his vegetarian diet eradicated body odor. He thought that his strict diet, which consisted mostly of fruit, freed him from the need to shower regularly or wear deodorant. But nearly everyone around him disagreed. Many of his co-workers also bristled at his abrasive, combative personality. When Jobs thought someone was dumb, he told them so, usually in a colorful way. And the criticism that Jobs didn't know electronics was pretty valid too. He understood the importance of good design, motivation, and marketing. He was a visionary, but he wasn't an engineer. Despite all that, the higher-ups at Atari liked Jobs. Atari co-founder Nolan Bushnell was particularly fond of him, so they struck up a compromise. They moved Jobs to the night shift, where he'd be away from his fellow employees, but still working hard for Atari, fixing circuit board designs. Jobs stayed on the night shift for several months, saving up money and occasionally inviting his friend Steve Wozniak over to help with the more technical aspects of the job. It's difficult to say what exactly he did during his early days at Atari, but according to some, one of Jobs' first tasks was to finish the technical design of the arcade game Touch Me. But not too long after he was hired, Jobs announced plans to quit. He wanted to travel to India to meet his spiritual guru. Jobs' trip gave Alcorn an idea. Atari was having some issues in Munich, Germany, where they were sending kits to be built. Atari games were designed at 60 frames per second, which was standard in America, but in Europe, the rate was 50 frames per second. They tried to troubleshoot the issue, but it seemed like face-to-face contact was needed. So Alcorn made a proposal. Atari would fly Jobs to Germany, where he'd fix the problem. He could fly to India from there. Jobs did fix the issue, but just like his co-workers in America, the people he worked with in Germany didn't appreciate his body odor or his attitude, and they let Alcorn know it. Ultimately, Jobs spent 7 months in India. His trip had various ups and downs, including spiritual highs and a terrible bout of dysentery. But by 1975, Jobs was back in America, and back on the night shift at Atari. This time he had a challenge ahead of him. Nolan Bushnell wanted to create a single-player version of Pong, where a player could launch a ball against a wall of bricks, breaking them one by one. Bushnell wanted Jobs to see it to fruition, or more accurately, he wanted Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak to see it to fruition. By that point, Bushnell understood that Jobs lacked engineering knowledge, but that Wozniak would often pop by Atari after his day job at Hewlett-Packard. He saw it as getting two Steves for the price of one, and price was on his mind. Bushnell was worried that the game he envisioned would require a lot of chips. At the time, Atari engineers were using anywhere from 150 to 170 chips per game, which drove the costs up significantly. But if anyone could get the chip count down, it was Wozniak. In fact, he designed his own version of Pong using only 30 chips. So Bushnell offered Jobs a financial incentive, a bonus for using less than 50 chips to complete the game. Jobs told Wozniak that the game needed to be created in 4 days, with as few chips as possible. But Atari didn't need the game finished that quickly. It was actually Jobs who wanted the game finished in 4 days. He wanted to travel to Portland, Oregon to help out with harvest season at a local commune. Wozniak accepted the challenge. It was an incredible demand. The task itself was hard enough. The tight timeline made it nearly impossible. Wozniak worked tirelessly on the game at night, and a little during his day job at Hewlett-Packard. Ultimately, they both rose to the occasion. Wozniak was the engineer. Jobs was the breadboarder, meaning that he created a prototype and ran tests. They completed the job in 4 days. Although there's some debate over the number of chips they used, Breakout definitely used less than 50, which made it cheaper to produce. But in a fun bit of irony, Atari couldn't actually do anything with Wozniak's work. Alcorn called Wozniak's creation, quote, remarkable and a tour de force. But therein lay the problem. Alcorn said, it was so minimized, though, that nobody else could build it. Nobody could understand what Woz did but Woz. It was this brilliant piece of engineering, but it was just unproducible. Since the manufacturing plant couldn't reproduce Wozniak's tightly designed work, another engineer built a new, more easily reproducible version of Breakout. That version needed around 100 chips. Breakout was released in 1976, and was so successful that it spurred a sequel, Super Breakout, just a few years later. Breakout was a victory. It showcased how effective Jobs and Wozniak were as a team. But the experience was bittersweet, because it also highlighted a fundamental difference in their personalities. Several years after Breakout hit the market, Wozniak discovered that Atari paid Jobs a substantial bonus for the game's low chip count. But Wozniak, despite all his hard work, didn't see a penny of it. Details and dollar amounts vary from source to source, but it's generally understood that when Bushnell originally offered the Breakout project to Jobs, he offered a flat rate of $700 to complete the task. He also offered a bonus for keeping the chip count under 50. But when Jobs explained the task to Wozniak, he didn't mention anything about a bonus. He only mentioned the $700 and offered to split the money 50-50. Wozniak eagerly accepted. So at the end of 4 sleepless nights, Wozniak received a check for $350. But what Jobs didn't tell Wozniak, and what Wozniak didn't discover until years later, was that Jobs also received a $5,000 bonus for coming in under the chip count. It was a lot of money, especially in 1975. Wozniak was in the dark about the bonus for years. Wozniak discovered the truth years later, when he was on a business trip and came across an anecdote about the bonus in a book. Shortly after the trip, Wozniak was at Bushnell's house for a Sunday afternoon picnic. They got to talking about the bonus, and Wozniak discovered that what he'd read in the book was true. Bushnell said, "We were talking and I asked, 'What did you do with that $5,000?' He says, 'What?' He was visibly upset. Wozniak's tender. I mean, he's a really good guy." The betrayal hurt Wozniak. Author Walter Isaacson details the controversy in his biography titled Steve Jobs. Wozniak has spoken about this issue on and off over the years, and he told Isaacson, "I wish he had just been honest. If he had told me he needed the money, he should have known I would have just given it to him. He was a friend. You help your friends." For his part, Jobs denied the story. He claimed that he always gave Wozniak exactly half of the money he received, but Isaacson notes that when he asked Jobs about this issue directly, he became unusually quiet and hesitant, before again denying that he ever shorted Wozniak. Despite the hurt feelings, Wozniak says he has moved on. On his website, Wozniak wrote, "If there was some dishonesty, I'm over that. Who hasn't done some things that would be considered bad anyway? I doubt that I'd find such a person interesting." In the aftermath of their rush to create Breakout, Jobs and Wozniak's friendship remained strong. Jobs' desire to become an entrepreneur was growing stronger than ever, and Wozniak's engineering skills were growing stronger too. In the spring of 1976, the pair showed off an early version of the Apple I at the Homebrew Computer Club, and soon after formed Apple Computer. Eventually, Jobs left Atari, and Wozniak left Hewlett-Packard. But they didn't lose touch with Atari co-founder Nolan Bushnell. At one point, during the early lean and scrappy years of Apple Computer, Jobs reached out to Bushnell with a business proposal. Apple needed money, and they were willing to offer a minority stake in the company in exchange for some much-needed cash. Bushnell recalled, "He asked me if I would put $50,000 in, and he would give me a third of the company. I was so smart, I said no." It's kind of fun to think about that when I'm not crying. For what it's worth, Bushnell did pretty well for himself financially. Later in life, as he reflected on the fact that he turned down an opportunity to own a third of Apple Computer, he said, "I've got a wonderful family. I've got a great wife. My life is wonderful. I'm not sure that if I had been uber rich, that I'd have had all of that." In the end, Jobs got the funding they needed to make Apple a success. Wozniak has since said that some of the features in the Apple II were inspired by what he learned while working on Breakout. It's hard to say what impact Jobs' time at Atari had on his later life, but it is kind of cool to know that one of the biggest innovators and game changers of our time got his start at a video game company. That's all for this episode of